Welcome to the And She Looked Up Creative Hour podcast with Lisa Bolton and Melissa Hartfield. We're two women who are artists and entrepreneurs, and yes, those two things can go together. This podcast is for the artists, the creators, and the makers who want to find a way to make a living creating what they love.
Hello, and welcome to episode 5 of the And She Looked Up Creative Hour. I'm Lisa Bolton, and I'm here with my co-host, Melissa.
Hello, everyone.
And today we're going to build upon our month-long theme of courage, and further so on our conversation last week on self-doubt. And we really wanted to tackle the idea of talking about risk-taking as a creator, as an artist. And that got us really talking about the difference between entrepreneurial risk and creative risk, where they intersect and overlap, and how that also kind of ties into what is often the ultimate risk for people in the creative space, and that's sort of stepping away from your day job, or I'll use quotes, safe job.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we're going to do as we sort of wrap the episode up is give you all some really tangible ways that you can mitigate risk at the risk of sounding like the George, you know the Seinfeld episode where George has to read the book on risk management?
I don't remember that one. Oh no.
He has to read a book on risk management, but he struggles with it because he can only hear his own voice in his head, and it's really boring, so he keeps falling asleep. So he comes across a blind man on the subway who tells him about books on tape.
Oh,
so
yes.
So he gets a book on tape of the book he's supposed to read, only the narrator sounds exactly like him.
Oh, that's awesome.
So all that to say is we're going to be talking a little bit about how you can minimize risk, but we're going to try and not make it sound deadly dull or boring. And hopefully our voices sound better than George Costanza.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny because we both knew we wanted to talk about this. And then as we were sort of planning out some of the things we wanted to give to listeners as a takeaway, we realized we were sort of talking about the same thing, but kind of labeling it different, I think, in some ways.
Yes, we were. Before we decided to record, we go through our outline of what we're going to talk about. And Lisa had put together a whole bunch of ideas on how to be creative with your art. And I was thinking more along the lines of how to, not how to be creative with your art, but how to take risks with your art. And I was thinking more along the lines of how to take risks from the more entrepreneurial side of being an artist. And as we started to talk about it, we realized we were kind of talking about the same thing, but we were coming at it from very different perspectives, which was actually quite eye-opening for the two of us.
I was trying to think, and I don't know if you would agree with this description, because when I describe myself entrepreneurial, I also know that I do have a definite creative side that I've sort of just gotten to know over the years. And so I would almost say like I've kind of was an entrepreneurial first who became a creative. And I would wonder if you would describe yourself as a creative who became an entrepreneur.
Yes.
Because I sometimes think, well, I'm looking at it from an entrepreneurial perspective. I think, well, you're also an entrepreneur, and I know you're looking at it from that way, but I almost think it's that what we were, started out as. And I feel like I started down the path, or certainly was in that zone, that comfort zone of like entrepreneurship, the business side of things, sort of the nuances of how people became self-employed. That really felt like my area of expertise. And then, I'm just sort of filtering that now through a creative lens, but I feel like you recognized and identified as a creative so early in life and are really comfortable in that space. And then you did the ultimate goal, I think, of a lot of creatives, which is that you became an entrepreneur. So I just think that sort of helps with our lens and how we're approaching some of these things.
Yeah, I realized I wanted to be an entrepreneur very young. I was in my early 20s when I really knew that's what I wanted to do, but I didn't get there for another 15 years or so. Is that right?
Right.
Thanks. The entrepreneurial side has been there for a long time, but yes, definitely the creative side came first. And so my hangups tend to be more around, I don't know, my hangups tend to be a little bit more around the entrepreneurial aspects of asking for money I'm not
Right.
good at asking for money. That's a big risk for me.
Yeah. And you recently started to sell your work more publicly, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so I opened an Etsy shop just before Christmas. It was not something I ever really planned on doing, but I had a lot of encouragement from people who followed me on Instagram,
Hmm.
and it took me a long time to get there. You know how you're the researcher out of the two of us?
Yes.
I researched Etsy for over not just Etsy, but every aspect about putting stuff out there for over a year, which is very
Really?
unusual. That's really unusual for me. Like I literally being like just having no I going from putting your work in a sketchbook to actually
Hmm.
uh, turning it into something that is of a saleable quality was so foreign to me. I literally didn't know what I was doing. So the research part was me just trying to get comfortable with like um, I have a big hang up around uh, asking. Like I feel like if I'm asking for money, what I put out there has to be of the utmost highest quality I can possibly make it. Like
Hmm.
I feel like anybody who's giving me money deserves that. And so that was my biggest challenge. I think I was just really frightened of putting something out there of somebody ordering it from me and going, oh, this is not what I was expecting. Like I can't believe I just paid $10 for this. That was where the risk side for me, and that's how I kind of mitigated it. I just spent a ton of time researching and trying different papers and different techniques until I came up with something that I would have been happy spending the money on. So that's where my head was with, um, yeah. Plus just the fear of nobody wanting my stuff.
Oh, I know.
Like what if I put it out there and it's crickets?
I know.
So there is that. But um, as a designer, I've been selling in quotation marks
Hmm.
for over 10 years. So I'm not as hung up about that. But what I produce for clients um, is more digital based.
So
So
yeah, I was going to ask you that. So is that the distinction in your head that, well, if it's digital, like it can always be fixed is not the right word, but it cannot be altered, or I can take feedback and change it. Whereas what I'm talking about physical art, that's a finished product, because you've charged for your work as an entrepreneur for years.
yeah, so when I'm creating a logo or a business card template or anything like that, I'm delivering it in a digital format. So yes, I can absolutely alter it. If the client comes back and says, you know what, I'm not. Could we just tweak this or something? It's not a big deal for me to go in and change it. But I'm not responsible for the quality of the paper. I'm not responsible for the print job. I'm just responsible for the digital file.
Hmm.
And so this was adding a whole nother level to what I was doing. It was a big education process. I had no idea there was that many kinds of paper out there.
No, right? All the details.
And just finding the paper and also just costing it. I wanted to
Sure.
create something that was affordable but still good quality. So those are all the things that were going through my head, and I don't know that I necessarily like I've I felt like there was a risk in terms of asking people for money and people saying no. But I didn't feel like I was taking a risk by going through that process, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think it's an education process. And I think at that point, there's not a lot at stake. Nobody knows you're researching all the papers. Nobody knows that you're gearing up to really put yourself out there. Like I
Right.
think when there's nothing at stake, there's no sense of loss on the table. That part is a little bit the easier part. I mean, that's the analysis paralysis I think we even touched on last in previous episodes with when it comes to perfectionism. I know from my perspective, as I can justify researching things for days because then it's not put out there. There's nothing at stake. I can,
Hmm.
it's I think truly when you're deciding on things that involve other people. I would even imagine just deciding on a pricing strategy. for you would have been, okay, well, how much am I going to be asking people for money? That's might be where it starts to turn, and there, you could start to feel a little bit of the risk butterflies sort of bubble up.
Yeah, pricing your work, that's a whole episode on itself. The ultimate question as a self-employed person.
I'd like to make a little public service announcement on pricing work too, because I echo your point and I feel like it comes up a lot. I know for me with selling food photography pictures or selling sort of recipe development, anything that way, people have a lot of opinions that are within that community about what to charge. And and things I find can get a little bit heated when people start talking about what you should and shouldn't charge. And I feel like it is such a personal decision that it just can get a little dicey sometimes. And I don't know about passing judgment on what anybody wants to charge for their art. I don't know if you like. I think that it is
I
important. Do you know where I'm going with this? Like I do
oh,
think
I could
that
go I could go on a rant for
yeah,
much longer than an hour.
I know. And I think to people that, if you're in a community and like I said, no matter what your art is, whether you're selling your word or your pictures or your painting or anything, knowing that depending on where a person is in their journey and their personal situation, it's going to determine 80% of what they want to charge for it. I mean, I come from a background of where we price things, in a market-based economy and there's a supply and demand, and that goes out the window with art. Art is, the price that you want to charge is the right price. And if someone's willing to pay for that, that's great. And I don't think, lower, like a lower ticketed item or a higher ticket item is going to drive the industry in either direction. I do think that we need to be a little more respectful of people that are just coming into the space and not I just think it's up to you what you want to charge.
Yes, yes. We will do an episode on pricing because
Mhm.
it is something that both of us have a lot of strong opinions on
Totally.
and a lot of experience with too.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
but if that is one of the things that is holding you back is from taking a leap, pricing doesn't get any easier whether you've been doing this for 5 minutes or 5 years or
Hmm.
15 years. Like it's always in the back of your head. Am I charging too much? Am I not charging enough? Lots of things that we can talk
Hmm.
about with that. But all that to say is that it's hard
Yeah.
and it doesn't get any easier. And don't let that deter you because you can always alter your price. Don't let that be a reason to stop you.
Yeah. So in terms of, and I'm just going through your recent experience of that, what other things do you think were part of sort of where you find entrepreneurial risk overlaps a little bit with creative risk?
The big one for me, obviously, was quitting my job. I went from an IT job, which a lot of people would consider to be, I guess, a real job, for lack of a better term, a job,
Hmm.
um, to going out on my own and going out on my own in a creative genre,
Hmm.
um, which a lot of people kind of considered to be a cute little hobby as opposed to something I could earn a living from.
Hmm.
So that's probably the biggest risk, or not probably, it is the biggest risk
Hmm.
that
I think it is. Yeah. Yeah.
um, but the interesting thing with that for me is that it didn't feel like a risk when I did it. I think two
Hmm.
of the biggest quote unquote risks that I've taken in my life, the ones that I get the most feedback from other people on, like, oh, I think you're so brave to do this, or oh, that's a big step, or whatever. We're moving out of the country when I was um, just fresh out of university and quitting my job. And neither of those felt like risks to me, oddly
Wow.
enough.
Right. Right.
But to focus more on the quitting my job one, that to me, staying in a traditional job, particularly the job that I was in, felt riskier to me than leaving, if that makes any sense.
In what way?
I never felt safe in my corporate job. I never felt safe. I always felt like I could be called into an office at any moment and told, "Hey, you know what? We're letting people go today."
I got you. Okay,
I
I see.
yeah. To me, I was just a name on a spreadsheet, and uh, And I worked for a company that was not shy about letting people go on a fairly regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
I worked there for 10 years and I had, I believe, 5 different directors in that space of time. All of them were let go. None of them moved on their own.
Wow.
And they were all great people. So
Yeah.
it wasn't like,
Yeah.
oh, that person was completely incompetent and thank God they're gone. It was like, oh, that was a really great person. I'm really sorry to see them leave. So I really felt like, to me, um, going out on my own was a way for me to control my own destiny.
Yeah. So you really took the risk out of it. You felt like I don't have to be worried about
Yeah.
anyone ever telling me when or when I don't have a job, like that I can
Yeah.
control it.
I mean, if you think about it, how many people right now out there with safe jobs, let's just say,
Mm-hmm.
um, are really safe? By making this conscious decision that I wanted to leave my job, and it took me a good 2 years from making the decision before I actually left, I was able to put a lot of things in place that I would never have put in place if I had intended to stay within the corporate world. Like, before I quit, I had no debt. All my debt was paid off. Nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not talking about mortgage when I talk about debt, because you're either paying a mortgage payment or you're paying rent. Either way, you have a housing cost. So
Yeah.
that's just part of your living cost. But I had no consumer debt. I started socking money away
Yeah.
into an emergency fund debt makes me very uncomfortable. So it was really important to me that I didn't find myself in a position where I couldn't pay my bills. So I quit my job with a year's worth of living expenses tucked
Wow.
away. I did a lot of research. I did a ton of reading. I read a whole bunch of books that really helped me prepare for what it would be like when I left. And I talked to people who
Mm-hmm.
were already working for themselves. So I did all those things. I did a ton of prep work till I got to the point where it was just like, okay, I'm ready to go. Um, and I think that's one of the ways that you can mitigate a risk of that magnitude. Like, I would never have just woken up and said, "Oh, I'm quitting my job today." That
Yeah.
I could never have done that. But I
Yeah.
had prepared enough that I felt like no matter what happens, I can do this for a year.
Yeah. It sounds like a few things I take out of that is one, you made the sacrifices not once you became self-employed, you made them 2 years before you became
Hmm.
self-employed. Because if you were putting away that money for all these things in the future, that meant you weren't spending that money on whatever you were previously spending that money on. So it was about not just waiting till, okay, once I get self-employed, I can cut back. You obviously made the conscious choice way before you left your job to say, well, I have to cut back now on maybe those discretionary items because I know that I'm going to need to put that money toward, this future lifestyle that I'm trying to build.
Yes. And so one of the things by doing that, by putting that money aside, is that I knew when I quit my job, I was not going to be making the salary that I was currently making, and probably not even close, and probably not for, it would probably take me several years to get back to that level. I was prepared for that. But by taking that money and putting it into investments or savings, I was forcing myself to start living on a much more limited budget and getting used to that. Before I quit, I mentioned this before. I didn't have any dependents, and I made good money, so money was not something I thought a lot about. Yeah, I was very comfortable
Yeah.
financially, and I've never been somebody who needs stuff. Like, I'm not a stuff person. I don't shop for fun um or feel the need to fill my life with things. That's just not how I'm
Mm-hmm.
hardwired. But other
Mm-hmm.
people are, and that brings comfort to them or makes them happy, and that's totally fine.
Mm-hmm.
So I was, yeah, it was just sort of forcing myself to live on less and less and less till I just got to the point where I was used to it and it wasn't a big adjustment. Whereas if I had lost my job, which by the way, I knew was coming, like, um, but if I had lost my job overnight, that would have been a different story, I didn't have a year's worth of I wouldn't have had a year's worth of living expenses. I wouldn't have had I would have had to really kind of face living on less. Yes, it's risky to quit your job, but it's also very risky to think that your job is safe.
And I think too, not everyone's in the position that they would have, 2 years to figure it out or think about it too. There are, people that probably see the writing on the wall now or just feel like they can't stay. So I think your approach was very, I think, from a risk averse perspective, super textbook and smart in that you followed the plan, to get you where you want to be. And I think that I want people to know they don't need to wait 2 years as well. Like everyone's situation is different, and what you want to take is sort of the spirit of that, which is thinking like, yeah, I'm going to have to start making sacrifices long before I go out as an artist. I'm going to have to plan for being able to come out of that. And so much of that is just walking through the exercise of right into the details of what things are going to cost and how you're going to have to make those lifestyle adjustments.
Yeah, and I think another thing that was really helpful to me is I mentioned that I talked to a lot of people who were already self-employed. And I think this is so important, not just in quitting your job, but with starting anything that's new and out of your comfort zone. But the key is don't just talk to people who are like you. Talk to people who are in different situations, like life situations from you. Because like I mentioned, I didn't have dependents. I didn't have debt. There were certain things that I didn't have to worry about. And I could have just talked to other people who were like me. But the reality is when you quit your job to become self-employed, you're hopefully doing it for the long term. Like that's hopefully, in the back of your head. And a lot of things can happen in a year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. You might quit your job when you're 23 and single and living on your own and it's just you. But what happens if you meet somebody a year from now and then you wind up sharing a living space with them? And then you have children, all these things that are going to change your situation. And at least if you talk to people who are in different stages or different situations than you can hear a lot of different things, and it'll give you a lot of things to think about. Like I'm in this particular spot right now, but you know what? I really do want to have kids 3-4 years from now. So how is that going to change what this looks like? And start thinking about ways you can plan for that kind of thing. So life doesn't stay still. So that's why I think it's really important to just expose yourself to a lot of different people. And it also really reinforces the fact that there is no one right way to do anything. And just because the way you want to do it isn't the way that your best friend says you should do it, doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong.
No, that's right. I mean, I think ultimately there's no perfect time either. I think you can try as much as you can plan and prepare. Eventually, you're going to have to take the leap. And I'm sure, I don't know what it felt like for you the day you gave your resignation, but I think even all the planning in the world, I'm sure there still must have been apprehension, or there must have been some sort of, a bit of, again, I call it sort of butterflies or a little bit of anxiety around, okay, I'm actually doing this. It's just suddenly become real.
For me, it was excitement. I actually wasn't that afraid. I was very excited.
Great.
But I wasn't afraid because I knew that I could pay, I knew I wasn't going to get a paycheck at the end of the month. But I knew that there was enough money there to take care of any bills that I might have. So my fear was minimized quite a bit. Now, there are other people out there who thrive off of that kind of pressure. I'm not one of them, and I knew that about myself. But there are other people who do need to leap without a safety net in order to force them to do the work. Some people, if they quit their job and know they've got a year's worth of living expenses set aside, they'll just kind of like take it easy. They'll procrastinate, or they won't put 100% effort in. And so for them, they need to leap with a 3-month savings account or a no savings account. I'm just not one of those people, and I knew that. So
we're talking about not being reckless, right? You can still sort of take the risk without being reckless. And that's going to, depending on your personal situation. You're right. Some people, it's such a self-driven, self-starter kind of field when you
Yeah.
take that leap into entrepreneurship that, it's all of a sudden when somebody doesn't care if you show up the next day, to work or not, that can be a big just learning curve in and of itself. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was my big risk that I took. I've definitely taken smaller ones since then, but that's the one that I think a lot of people struggle with, and especially I think if you are more of a creative person, because I do think a lot of us feel like in the back of our heads this thing that we're doing that probably brings us a lot of joy and that we really truly love and feel passionate about really is just a hobby.
What are your thoughts on going part-time with something like that? Like, could you have ever seen doing some of the things you do now off the side of your desk, sort of? Like, would you
So
recommend the intermediate step, or do you think
yeah,
it's
and I did freelance for about a year and a half before I quit my job. I had existing clients. I don't think that's something I would have done if I hadn't been thinking of exiting. Like I've always made stuff. I would have continued to do that, but I don't know. I think if I'd been very happy in my job and I hadn't necessarily had that entrepreneurial bent, I probably would have just carried on making stuff and been quite content doing that.
mm-hmm.
Like I look at my mom, she's retired now, but she loved photography from from when I was a very young kid.
Mm-hmm.
And she really threw herself into it. She took classes, she joined photography clubs, which are quite common. And they often have little competitions and showings and things. And she participated in those, and she still does. And she really enjoys that. But I don't think it's ever occurred to her that she would try to sell her work.
Mm-hmm.
Like that would be a leap that I just don't think she's thought about.
And is that from a point of I am just doing the work to like doing the art to do the art as a part of her own
Yeah,
personal
I
outlet,
think
personal therapy?
yeah, I mean
You know what I
I mean
mean?
she's
Like that.
retired. She doesn't need to sell her art. It's
Mm-hmm.
not like a matter of I need money to survive kind of thing.
No.
It's just like I love to do this and this brings me a lot of enjoyment, which that's something to consider when you're thinking about going from something that you really love to selling it. This is one of the reasons why I stopped doing photography for hire because I loved photography, but once I started doing it for clients, it became a job and a lot of the joy went out of it. Suddenly I had deadlines and I wasn't just making it to please myself, I was making it to please somebody else. And photography had always been the one thing that was mine. Yeah, whereas design was very different for me. I never felt that kind of like, I always saw myself designing for other people. I don't design, generally speaking, for myself. Yeah, and I think that's important to realize that once you do cross that line from hobby to money earner, things
Mm-hmm.
change. Like they do change. That is part of the risk.
Yeah.
Like, are you willing to take that risk? And that was one of the reasons why I held off on opening an Etsy shop for as long as I did. Almost as soon as I started putting Miss Doodle out there,
Mm-hmm.
which was like 4 or 5 years ago, people started saying, "Oh, you could make cards for this. You could sell her. You could. When are you going to make prints?" And
Mm-hmm.
I really was like, "No, no, no.
Eh,
I don't want to do that. Like this is she's Miss Doodle and she's mine and she's cute and I have a lot of fun and this is fun and I don't want it to become a business."
And finishing that sentence, you don't want it to become a business because.
I think because I was creating her on my own terms. Like, oh, I
Mm-hmm.
have an hour today to make a Miss Doodle. There's just a different pressure when it becomes a business.
And the irony is, it's a little bit of an artificial pressure because I think it's in terms of people fell in love with the art as you originally intended, and then we get in our own head thinking we either have to change it, produce more of it, do it differently. There's now it's like there's people standing behind you watching you as you do this, and it's almost a virtual pressure that truly, if you can set that aside a little bit, the art can still come through. Like you can still create the way you wanted to. I don't know, without that feeling, because I've experienced that with doing different projects for people where, all of a sudden I'm like, I feel paralyzed by my ability to create something that normally I would have no problem in, but it's like I had these voices in my head, or these people, I feel these people peering over me, watching me work, and I felt like I can't do my work. So I think if there's a way to get that, as soon as I can get that voice out of my head, I know that automatically my work gets better.
I think there's something to be said for, like Miss Doodle is out there. You can buy her now. But it took me a long time to get to a point where I was ready for her to be out there. Interestingly, most of the people who harassed me to put her out there were people who never bought her once she was out there. So that is something to keep in mind. Just, it's okay. We don't have to monetize everything.
Mm-hmm.
It is okay to have some things that you really enjoy and that are a hobby, that like it's healthy to have hobbies.
Mm-hmm.
And to have some joy that goes with them. But yeah, once you cross that line, it's hard to pull it back. I was able to do it with photography, and I'm very glad that I did, and I don't regret that. There is a risk once you start asking for money, and that's suddenly you do have to think about all these things that when you're just, like I mentioned earlier on, when I create Miss Doodle in my sketchbook, there she is. She's in my sketchbook. I take a picture. I put it on Instagram. Oh, she's so cute. That's great. But then to actually make her a thing people could buy, I had to get her out of my sketchbook. I had
Mm-hmm.
to get her into a computer. I had to digitize her. I had to learn how to print her.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to start looking at how much does it cost for my ink? How much does it cost for my printer paper? Suddenly, Miss Doodle was all about these numbers and
Yeah.
margins and things that you have to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas before, she was just somebody I made in my sketchbook, and it was fun. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a very different thing to take something that get a lot of enjoyment from, and then turn it into something that you make money from. And there is risk in that. There's different types of risk. There's the creative risk, which is losing the joy that thing gives you. And then there's the entrepreneurial risk of putting something out there and actually earning a living from it.
And that's where I think there is even some value in, if people are thinking about, putting their work out there for sale, to to maybe pick a piece, a small part of their work, and go through the process of setting it up. And that's
Yeah.
sort of what about this sort of doing it quote unquote part-time, or doing it to find out, like, is this really for you? What feelings did it evoke? Like, are you, is it taking away from your ability to, what was a sense of joy now becomes a sense of work? I think you and I have both gone through this. I know I certainly have, with knowing the parts of my creative work that I can do, that I can monetize, and I don't lose the joy in that. And I know the parts that I've let go of doing because it's just no fun anymore. It becomes like a job. And I can tell the creative projects that I do for hire that I push down my to-do list because I'm avoiding doing them. And I can identify the ones I'm not hiding from. And I over the few years, it takes some time to say, even though the money's there, it's not worth it if at the end of the day I'm doing, a project I doesn't fire me up. And not all aspects of monetizing your art are going to fire you up, and you're going to have to go through some of those things that aren't fun. But when the output starts getting affected, and you don't want to actually do the work, I get that not everybody wants to do the bookkeeping or the packaging or all the other things that go along with selling even a physical product. I do think that when all of a sudden you're like, I don't even want to create the product anymore because it's not bringing me joy, it's feeling like a job, then that's where maybe if you have a full-time job now, starting and just testing the waters with a product or two to really see how it makes you feel is a good way to mitigate some of that risk.
Yeah, and that's where something like opening a small Etsy shop can be a really great idea because you can just sell one or two items
Mm-hmm.
and you can get a sense of what the whole process is like. Like you get a sense of what it's like to put your work out there in a marketplace. Things like, Etsy has listing fees and, do you want to run ads? Those kinds of things. Like you get a sense of like, it does cost some money to make money. You get a sense of what it's like to package it, what it's like to ship it, all those things. And you start to really see like what is truly involved.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be, you're not taking the risk of opening your own online shop and hiring somebody to develop an online presence for you or any of those things. You can just start really nice and small and get a sense of what it's like and build it up to the point where you're like, okay, you know what? I love this. I love what I'm
Mm-hmm.
doing. And I'd like to take it another step further. So yes, absolutely. You can start part-time, and Etsy's full of people who do that. It's full of people who are just, you know what? They love knitting little baby hats. Like they just love it. And
Mm-hmm.
this is a way for them to make a little bit of extra money while still doing something that they love. Some of them move on to create a bigger presence, and some of them are quite happy just
Mm-hmm.
selling 2 or 3 little baby hats a month. There's nothing wrong with either one,
Mm-hmm.
but starting small helps you mitigate that risk. Another idea is take work that you've already created and try coming up with ways that you could sell that. Like maybe you're a watercolor artist and you've got 20 canvases sitting in your house because you've painted them as for a way to relax or because it's something you really enjoy, and you're running out of wall space. You've given all your friends watercolor paintings, you're running out of wall space. Why not head down to a little local cafe and
Mm-hmm.
say, you know what, I'm a painter. Here's some of my work. Would you be interested in displaying it in the cafe and, you know, possibly selling it on my behalf kind of thing?
Yeah.
Um,
You can be a passive entrepreneur. You
yeah,
can, really kind of commit like something like that. That's really a way of just getting your work out there without a lot of the logistics of, say going down the online shop route or something. You're getting feedback on your work. Absolutely. I think that's a really good way.
yeah, and there's very little risk involved. You've already made the paintings. They're sitting in your house. The very worst that's going to happen is the cafe says, no,
No,
we don't
thank
do that.
you.
Or they take them on, but nobody buys one.
Hmm.
Okay, you're no further back or ahead than you were when you started. You're just okay. This didn't resonate with the people in that cafe.
Hmm. Hmm.
So
My mom is a watercolor artist on the side, definitely just a personal outlet for her. And she she lives in a small town, and her experience was again not really much similar to your mom. Retired, doesn't really need to do it for financial reasons, but she volunteered at an art gallery and had the opportunity as a result to display some of her work. Call it, for maybe it gets displayed for a month or two. She works a few shifts in the art gallery where a lot of artists display things, but whether or not she sold or didn't sell anything that month or that week, she got exposed to other types of art, got to meet other artists, got to see other mediums, just kind of got introduced to a whole new community and made connections that she would have never made. So while she didn't maybe sell anything all the time, I think the value she gained when you talked about, meeting new people and using that to mitigate risk, it was just great, I think, to be able to interact with other artists who are also doing something similar to her and to get ideas and gain inspiration that way. So it just sort of opens the door to your community.
community can be huge when you're an artist. That is quite often, especially if you are somebody who creates like physical art.
Hmm.
It's easier, I think, to make an in-person connection with somebody.
It
It's
is like
important to get out there into your community, and there's so many ways you can do that. We'll talk more about that another
hmm
time, um, but these are all ways that you can take very small risks,
hmm
baby risks, that don't have a lot of bad risk associated with them.
Yeah, you don't have a lot at stake. You don't have a lot
Yeah.
to lose. It's, whether the painting is sitting there. One example that I've employed in not speaking to physical art, but is in the written word. So in writing my book, I went through a lot of rewrites, a lot of editing, and there were large pieces of content that I couldn't use in the end product. And for the longest time, I sat up with those old pieces of content, and they just literally lived as digital draft number 64, until I realized that I could actually repurpose that content. And the content was good. I believed in it at the time and felt it was important. And while it may not have been a fit for that piece, I was able to reuse that content and sell it in a different way in sort of a freelance style way, because it was like an article content that could be sold in a different venue. And so something that was truly like on the cutting room floor actually became a source of income that I never would have thought of. So, and the risk of that was none, because it literally was something I was never going to look at again. But it just because someone else didn't like it doesn't mean it wasn't the right fit for a different audience.
Yes, I have tons of photos on hard drives all over the place from gigs that I did, or even some that I just shot myself that were never used. And, I could easily look to put those on stock websites if I wanted to. It wouldn't involve me getting out and starting up being a photographer again for hire. It would just be a way to put my work out there in a very manageable way, and make a little bit of side income from potential stock revenue. And that would be a very, very small risk that I could take to open up another revenue stream, or make use of that content that I've already created without having to put myself out there by creating new content, or trying to find new clients and go through the whole business aspect of photography again.
Well, especially if you still have a full-time job. For people that still do, money is a limited resource, but so is time. And sometimes just being able to create something new to put out there, whereas if you can, use something that you've already created, or something that hasn't seen the light of day, you'd be surprised at the audience that is out there for that kind of work sometimes.
Yeah, you can also hit up your friends. Just let your friends know, like, hey, I'm making greeting cards. Here's some that I've done for Mother's Day. Is anybody out there interested in a few of them? Or I have a friend who's taken up pottery and really enjoys it, and he's been doing it for a couple of years now. And he took out a small table at a local craft fair before Christmas. Very, very, very tiny. I think it was in a church. It wasn't one of the big Vancouver craft fairs. And I don't think he paid very much for the table. I think it was $25 or something. He knew it wasn't going to get a lot of traffic, but it was a way for him to try it out. He spent his $25 for his table. I believe he made his table money back, so yay.
Yay. Yeah.
But it was just an opportunity for him to try it out, see what the experience was like in a small environment, see if people were interested in his work, see what it was like to attend a craft fair as a vendor, and build up his confidence, so that next Christmas maybe he goes for a bigger, maybe he starts creating stock in August or September and building up a little inventory so that he can do a bigger show and put it out there to a bigger audience. Like, that's a really easy way to mitigate the risk, but still push yourself out of your comfort zone a little bit.
Yeah, and I think we'd be remiss not to speak to the fact that, there's the risk of what if nobody buys it, and there's also the risk of what if everybody does. And so going through that experience and walking you through, like, it's not always about what if it's a failure. It's like, what if it's a success? And am I set up in a way that would support success? So if I had to scale up my business, if I had to suddenly create orders, at a faster rate than I'm doing now, like, what would that look like? Because if ultimately your goal is to make this a full-time income and and to, I don't know, kind of experience some growth in that area, I think you're not doing yourself a favor if you don't run through that scenario and say, how could I scale this up? Because in this day and age, people want things and they want them quickly. So we live in the sort of Amazon Prime world now. And if you're not able to meet that demand, they may move to a different artist. And so I think it's good as you're thinking about your business process and your creative process is to say, like, if I'm putting this stuff out here and now I got asked to do it on a larger scale, what would that look like? And at least walk yourself through that scenario.
That is so true. One of my favorite YouTubers that I watch, she's an art YouTuber, and she has sold her art through Redbubble and a few other online platforms that will take your art and print it on various items like phone cases and prints and things like that. But last year she decided to actually open an online shop. And she just does it in, like, she makes a certain amount of product. When it's gone until the next shop opening. And her very first shop opening, she did a few prints and a few enamel pins, and they sold out in minutes.
Wow.
And she has a separate YouTube channel that's just her vlog, and she has shown the entire process over the last, I don't think it's been quite a year, but probably coming up on that, of her going through these shop openings, and every one has been bigger than the last, to the point where her entire process, like, she just keeps selling out. She hasn't hit her ceiling yet, where she's like, okay, this is the ceiling. She's just constantly trying to meet the demand. And so we're watching her as she's ordering shipping supplies. Like, she's getting a pallet of shipping supplies delivered to her house. We're watching her as she's sitting there with her husband in front of the TV folding shipping boxes at night and things like that, and just watching the process and realizing how much work goes into being successful. Like, if that happens, are you prepared? Are you prepared for your house to turn into a warehouse? So
there's a lot of success stories like that. I think if people talk about, oh no, the order sat on my dining room table, our garage was full of X. Like, I think that's a common successful, creative entrepreneur story.
But it's also interesting to watch the stress that she's going through, because she's very open with it all. A few weeks ago, one of her orders for new product was held up at Canada Customs, and they won't release it until she provides a ton of paperwork. And, her PayPal account was frozen because of the income coming in, and she had to, like, just, you get to see all the challenges that she's facing. And I'm actually very grateful that there are people out there who put that out there for the world to watch, because it really is eye-opening and makes you realize, like, wow, what if everybody does buy this? Am I prepared for that? Do I want that? Like, do I want to sell 30 baby hats a month? Or do I want to sell 10,000 baby hats a month? Like,
yeah, just do yourself that favor that says, I'm going to at least ask myself that question, I think. And if 100 hats is your limit, then that's your limit. But I think if you're truly in it for the long haul and the financial gains, and you just want to make sure that you're setting yourself up, that scalability is something you've at least considered and had done a bit of just stock taking in that.
I think another thing to consider, and I'm seeing this very much in the food blogging world, which is where I spend most of my day job time, is mitigating your risk by diversifying your revenue. And that all sounds very bankerish, but that's another way you can mitigate risk. If suddenly, one source of revenue dries up, hopefully you have some other things going on in the background. Maybe you are selling your paintings in that cafe, and that's bringing you a nice little bit of revenue. But what if you taught a watercolor class? Like, that's a new revenue stream. That's a way to generate a little bit more income and put you well on your way to earning a full-time living as a working artist.
And think about the peripheral inputs that go into your art as well. Like, I think about people that then they sell, like bakers, for example, they start to sell spatulas. Now, it could be a spatula branded with your logo, or it could just be your favorite spatula. So, kind of looking at all the things that go in as well to your creative process, and could those be exponential revenue opportunities?
Yeah, and there's lots of opportunities. I think sometimes when you are very focused on creating um, or your art, sometimes you don't necessarily think of those other avenues. You could teach a class at your local night school. You could create an online class. There's all
Hmm.
kinds, like a platform like Skillshare, any type of art technique you want to learn, you can learn it on Skillshare, and somebody out there is making money from teaching on a platform like that.
Documenting your process, I think, like just to your point about the woman who was, just showing how they were folding boxes at the dining room table, like documenting your process and using a different medium to share that can bring in new audiences and new revenue opportunities as well.
Yes. So this woman has turned a very successful YouTube channel into a physical business this point, which is probably bringing in as much, if not more revenue than her YouTube channel. So, but she's done it by, and this is very common for art YouTubers. They have an art channel and then they have a vlog channel where they share like what goes on behind the scenes. They're really fascinating to watch. Yeah, so you can do things like that. You could, if you're that baker who's selling a spatula, why not uh, create a small booklet or something that you could sell in your bakery? There's a lot of people out there who bake on the side and don't have a physical, they're just doing it out of their kitchen. They're making cupcakes for weddings, or they're doing special
Hmm.
orders of cookies or things like that. Why not create a little booklet of 10 of your favorite cookie recipes and sell it to your clients. Put it out there like, hey, you've ordered my cookies in the past. Here, you can have the recipe at home. It's just stapled together and it's perfect. My mom's recipe box is full of little booklets like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's so many, and I think it really does, from a mitigating risk perspective. We're recording this in March 2020, and it's a really turbulent time right now, and different industries are being affected, and diversification of, your investment portfolio is something you hear about all the time,
Mhm.
but diversifying your entrepreneurial portfolio can be really valuable at a time like this when maybe people aren't going out as much and might be looking to order things in or experiencing your product, or your art in a different way, due to sort of extenuating circumstances. So you're really building in that income stream protection for yourself if you're diversifying those streams in your art. So, right now you might be sitting at your day job thinking, well, I'm just creating it as a hobby, but these are all steps, like as you make that first leap, if you start to sort of brainstorm and capture those ideas that you may not implement till down the road, at least you're sort of capturing them now and thinking about ways that you could maybe diversify that portfolio if it becomes a route that you want to take as a self-employed artist.
Yeah, I think when I think of a true entrepreneur, to me, they are people who find the opportunities where others don't see them.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, right now things are a little bit turbulent. There's a lot of doom and gloom and, a
Uh-huh.
lot of silliness actually happening out there at the moment, but there's a lot of fear. And there are people out there who will find a way to um, to seep into the cracks, whether it's delivering groceries to people or just like all these little things other people are too busy worrying about big picture things. There's always somebody there who's going to see a little way to get in and help people and earn a
Mm-hmm.
few bucks at the same time. And I think you have to be a positive person to do that. I also think another hallmark of an entrepreneur is people who look for ways they can serve people. And that's,
Mm-hmm.
you're looking for an opportunity. You're looking for an opportunity to serve people in something that's lacking in their life. And as artists and creatives, quite often what we're looking to serve people is a feeling. Art tends to bring
Yes.
people feelings. And if you're an artist and you're in a, I mean, during the Great Depression, during the 1930s, I think it cost a dime to go to a movie. And the movies industry was one of the few industries that did extremely well during the Depression because people needed an escape outlet. They would find that dime to go to the movies to feel good for a couple of hours.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is an opportunity when you create art. The truth is, if you can find a way to make people feel good in a time where they don't feel good,
Mm-hmm.
there are opportunities there. People will find a way to give themselves a little treat every now and then. They're not going
Yeah.
to be spending hundreds of dollars on it, but if you can find a way to give them a little treat for $10 as opposed to $100, there's something
Yeah.
there.
Having different entry points to your access your art is a really smart strategy.
Mhm.
And also, as much as it's about serving your clients or your community, help them serve others too, because in times like this, other people want to be generous. And if they can, purchase your art or get your art to somebody that they know needs help, and you make it easy for them to do so, I really appreciate that. Um, as a busy, person with kid and kind of running around, and you're constantly having to, buy gifts or give. It's really nice to be able to give somebody something original, and having an artist that makes it easy for you to gift something is
Yeah.
really valued, I think.
There's always a silver lining. You just have to
Hmm.
look for it, and you have to look for ways that you can incorporate that into what you do as part of your creative business. It can just be something very small, like, what, I'm going to create a line of $5 stickers
Hmm.
that are really super cute that people will love. Um, could be something as simple as that.
Yeah. I think we just want to encourage people to take the first step, take the risk,
Yeah.
and really, um, uh, there can be so little at stake just to get your work out there. You can do it without losing it, and if you've really thought through the process, and again, you're not being reckless, you're not even being risky, you're just taking that first step. Um, I think that, yeah, everyone can do it.
Yes. And if you are taking a risk on a bigger scale, like quitting your job or opening a studio space or something along those lines where it's a much bigger risk financially, and that's where you really do need to do your research and understand what's involved and start planning in small bits for making that big move.
Hmm.
Because you can make those big moves. They just take a little longer. That's
Yeah,
all.
exactly. Exactly. Well, that's a good discussion, I think, on all sort of. I think we, for something that we, when you and I first talked about this, came from a different lens on. I think we've sort of found a lot of overlap.
We did. We it was funny how completely far apart we actually were on what this meant.
Mm-hmm.
And then once we
Totally.
started talking about it, we realized, we're not that far apart.
Not
So
that far apart in the end. That's
yeah.
usually the case.
But it also just proves that there's always more than one way to think about something, and there's always more than one way to tackle something.
Mm-hmm.
So don't be deterred if somebody is doing something
Yeah.
um, differently from how you want to do it. As long as you are putting something in place that works for you and you've got the systems behind you to help you make that move, you can do this.
Yeah. I think just be brave. I think the world out there is actually a lot kinder than sometimes people
It
think it is. Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you just need to take a leap.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get anywhere from standing still. Like, it's such a cliche, but it is so true. If you
Yeah.
stand rooted to one spot, you don't move.
Well, I think that kind of wraps up sort of our I think we had about 3 or 4 episodes here about on courage that we really wanted to talk about. And I'm kind of excited about next month's theme as well. I think we're going to dive into the world of
Yeah.
inspiration.
Yeah, our theme for April is inspiration. So we're going to be talking about we're looking at 4 different aspects of inspiration. And yeah, we hope you will join us for that.
Yeah, well, thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for joining us for the And She Looked Up Creative Hour. Be sure to check out the show notes for any links or resources we talked about in this episode. If you enjoyed the chat, please be sure to subscribe and you'll automatically receive any new shows we release. And finally, we'd love to hear from you. Drop us a review, tell us where you're listening from, or just send a note to say hi. You can find us at andshelookedup.com or on Instagram with the same handle. Thanks for listening.